Good luck finding your way back." My daughter and her husband laughed, abandoning me on a desert road in Egypt. I watched them drive away. They had no clue I was the sole heir to a $330 million fortune, and they had just failed the final test. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how a 67-year-old widow from Minnesota ended up stranded in the middle of nowhere, and how my own family's greed became their ultimate downfall. Trust me, this story has twists you won't see coming. It started 3 months earlier when my husband Robert passed away suddenly from a heart attack. We'd been married for 42 years, and losing him felt like losing half my soul. But Robert had been a brilliant financial planner, and he'd left me very, very well taken care of. The lawyers called it generational wealth, enough money to support several families for decades. Madison had always been distant, even as a child. She'd moved to California after college and only called on holidays, usually asking for money. The requests had started small after Robert's death, help with rent, car payments, credit card bills, but they'd gotten bigger and more frequent. When she suddenly showed up at Robert's funeral with her new husband Tyler, claiming she wanted to reconnect and be there for Mom during this difficult time, I should have been suspicious, but grief makes you vulnerable to hope. Tyler was everything Madison wasn't: charming, attentive, full of ideas for family bonding. He was also 6 years older than my 22-year-old daughter, which should have been red flag number 1. But he had this way of making you feel special, like you were the most important person in the room. Classic manipulator behavior, though I didn't see it then. The warning signs had been there for weeks. Madison had been asking increasingly specific questions about Robert's will, about how much money we had, about whether I'd made any provisions for her future. She'd also been pushing me to update my estate planning, suggesting I needed younger perspectives on financial management. "Sarah, you've always talked about visiting Egypt," Tyler said during one of their frequent visits to my Minneapolis home. "The pyramids, the Nile, all that history you love." Madison and I were thinking, what if we made that dream come true? A family trip to heal and bond. I was touched. For 40 years, Robert had promised we'd see the pyramids together someday. Now Tyler was offering to make that happen when my own daughter never had. What I didn't know was that they'd already spent weeks researching Egyptian laws, banking systems, and how long it would take for a missing person to be declared dead. Tyler had convinced Madison that I was going to waste their inheritance on charities and medical expenses. He painted a picture of me as a selfish old woman who didn't understand the value of money. The truth was much simpler. Tyler was drowning in gambling debts, and Madison was so desperate to keep her older husband that she'd do anything he asked, including leaving her own mother to die in the desert. We flew into Cairo on October 15th. The first few days were magical, seeing the Sphinx, touring the pyramids, taking a boat down the Nile. Tyler played the perfect son-in-law, taking photos of Madison and me together, insisting we make memories to last a lifetime. Now I understand why he was so insistent on documenting everything. He needed proof that I'd been alive and happy when we started the trip. On our 4th day, Tyler suggested we rent a car and explore some authentic Egypt away from the tourist crowds. He'd found this amazing Bedouin village, he said, where we could experience real desert culture. Madison seemed nervous, but Tyler was so enthusiastic that I agreed. We drove for hours into the desert, the landscape becoming more desolate with each mile. Tyler chatted constantly, pointing out imaginary landmarks, keeping the mood light. I was in the back seat with a small backpack I'd brought for day trips, my sunglasses and hat protecting me from the glare, actually enjoying the adventure. Then the car stopped. "Engine trouble," Tyler announced, popping the hood. "Sarah, could you grab that toolbox from the back?" I got out to help, and that's when I heard the car doors slam. By the time I turned around, Tyler was already backing away from me, Madison in the passenger seat looking anywhere but at my face. "Tyler? Madison? What's going on?" "Sorry, Sarah," Tyler called out, his charm completely gone. "Nothing personal, but we need that inheritance now, not in 20 years. Madison finally looked at me, and I saw my answer in her eyes. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. "Madison," I said, my voice steady despite the shock, Whatever he's promised you, it's not worth this. Good luck finding your way back. She laughed, but it sounded forced, hysterical. Tyler was already turning the car around. And then they were gone, leaving me with nothing but my small backpack containing a water bottle, some snacks, sunscreen, and the clothes on my back. The silence of the desert was deafening. As I watched their dust cloud disappear, something strange happened. Instead of panic, I felt almost amused. If Madison and Tyler thought they were dealing with some helpless old widow, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. After all, you don't survive 40 years of marriage to a man like Robert without learning a thing or two about strategy, and they just made the biggest tactical error of their lives. But first, I had to survive the desert. Standing alone in the Sahara Desert with the sun beating down mercilessly, most people would have panicked. I won't lie. For the first few minutes, the enormity of what Madison and Tyler had done hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter had just sentenced me to death, but then my practical Minnesota mind kicked in. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had water for maybe 12 hours, some crackers, and sunscreen in my pack. The nearest civilization could be anywhere from 10 to 100 miles away. Time to prioritize. I looked around, taking inventory of my situation. The road we'd been traveling was barely a road at all, more like tire tracks in the sand that could disappear in the next windstorm. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, but it wasn't completely barren. I could see some scraggly vegetation in the distance, which meant water sources might exist. My late husband Robert used to say that intelligence is knowing what you don't know. Well, I didn't know much about desert survival, but I knew enough about basic physics and human biology to give myself a fighting chance. First priority, shelter from the sun. I found a cluster of rocks that offered some shade and sat down to think. Madison and Tyler expected me to die out here, which meant they had to have a plan for what came next. They'd need time to get back to civilization, report me missing, and somehow gain access to Robert's accounts. That's where their plan had a fatal flaw. They knew I was wealthy, but they had no idea how Robert had structured our finances. My husband had been paranoid about family members getting greedy after his death, probably because he'd seen it happen to his own father. Every major asset was locked in trusts with specific conditions that even I didn't fully understand. Tyler and Madison were about to discover that stealing from the dead isn't nearly as easy as they thought. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right then, my immediate concern was staying alive long enough to see their faces when they realized what they'd done. As the afternoon wore on, I rationed my water carefully and tried to remember everything I'd ever read about desert survival. The temperature would drop dramatically at night. That could work in my favor. I needed to conserve energy during the day and travel at night when it was cooler. When the sun began to set, painting the desert in impossible shades of orange and red, I started walking. I followed the faint tire tracks, hoping they'd lead me somewhere, anywhere, with people. The desert at night is a completely different world. The silence is absolute, except for the occasional sound of wind across sand. The stars are so bright they actually hurt your eyes, and the cold cuts through you like a knife after the blazing heat of the day. I walked for hours, stopping frequently to rest and check my direction by the North Star. Thank God my father had taught me basic navigation when I was young. My feet were blistering in my tourist sandals, and my water was running low, but I kept moving. Just as dawn was breaking, when I was starting to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake by leaving my small shelter, I saw something in the distance. Buildings. Old, crumbling, probably abandoned, but definitely man-made. It turned out to be a small Bedouin settlement that had been deserted for years. Most of the structures were falling apart, but there were still some intact walls and, miracle of miracles, an old well in the center of the village. I'd never been so happy to see dirty water in my life. The well still had water, though it was brackish and tasted like minerals. I drank carefully, knowing that too much too fast could make me sick. Then I found the most sheltered building and collapsed into exhausted sleep. When I woke up, it was late afternoon and someone was watching me. An elderly Bedouin man sat cross-legged near the doorway, his weathered face kind but curious. He spoke in Arabic, gesturing toward me with concern. I didn't understand the words, but his tone was clear. He was asking if I was all right. American, I said, pointing to myself. Lost. Family. I made a gesture indicating they'd left me. His expression darkened. He understood enough English to get the gist, and apparently, abandoning family members in the desert was just as appalling to him as it should be to anyone with basic human decency. Over the next day, this kind stranger, whose name sounded like Hakim, taught me basic desert survival. How to collect dew for drinking water using cloth, which plants were edible and which would kill you. How to navigate by the stars and read the subtle signs that indicated direction. He also gave me something I hadn't expected. Confirmation that I was tougher than I'd ever imagined. At 67, I was learning skills that most people would consider impossible at my age. On the second morning, Hakim gestured toward the horizon and said something in Arabic, then pointed to himself and then to me. He was offering to guide me back to civilization, but as we prepared to leave the abandoned village, I made a decision that surprised even me. I asked him to wait while I did something important. Using a piece of charcoal from an old fire pit, I wrote a message on the wall of the most prominent building. Madison and Tyler left me here to die on October 18th, 2024. If you find this, and I don't survive, they murdered me for my inheritance. Sarah Catherine Walsh. Then I wrote it again in larger letters on a flat rock near the well. Call it insurance, call it evidence, but mostly, call it the first step in what was going to be the most satisfying revenge of my life. As Hakim and I set off across the desert toward the main road, I found myself almost looking forward to what came next. Madison and Tyler thought they'd eliminated the only obstacle to their fortune. They had no idea they'd just awakened something far more dangerous than a helpless old widow. They'd awakened a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The truck that finally stopped for Hakim and me was driven by a European archaeologist named Dr. Andreas Meyer, who took one look at my condition and immediately radioed for medical assistance. 2 days in the desert had left me dehydrated, sunburned, and looking like I'd been through hell, which frankly I had. My God, what happened to you? Dr. Meyer asked as he helped me into his air-conditioned vehicle. The relief of cool air was so overwhelming, I nearly cried. My family left me in the desert, I said simply. There was no point in sugarcoating it. His face went through several expressions: disbelief, horror, and finally anger. That's attempted murder, he said bluntly. We need to get you to a hospital and contact the authorities immediately. As we drove toward Cairo, I found myself in the interesting position of having to convince people not to help me too much. Dr. Meyer wanted to call the police immediately. The hospital staff wanted to admit me for observation. The American consulate wanted to launch an international incident. But I had a different plan. I appreciate everyone's concern, I told the consulate official, a earnest young man named David Patterson who looked like he'd never dealt with anything more serious than a lost passport. But I need to handle this my own way. Mrs. Walsh, your daughter and son-in-law abandoned you in the desert. This is a serious crime. Oh, I'm very aware of what they did, I said, and they're going to pay for it, but not the way you think. What I didn't tell David was that I'd already made several phone calls from the hospital. The first was to my attorney in Minneapolis, James Morrison, who nearly had a heart attack when he heard my voice. Sarah, thank God. Madison and Tyler reported you missing 2 days ago. They said you wandered off from your hotel and never came back. The Egyptian police have been searching. James, I interrupted. I need you to listen very carefully. Madison and Tyler tried to kill me. They left me in the desert to die. Do not, under any circumstances, give them access to any of Robert's accounts or assets. There was a long silence. My God, Sarah, are you certain? I spent 2 days in the Sahara Desert with nothing but a water bottle and some crackers. I'm very certain. What do you want me to do? For now, nothing. Let them think their plan is working. But I need you to start preparing for legal action, and I need you to activate something Robert set up that I never thought I'd have to use. The something Robert had set up was brilliant and typical of my cautious husband's planning. Buried deep in our estate, documents was a provision that if I ever died under suspicious circumstances, an automatic investigation would be triggered, and all assets would be frozen until those circumstances were fully resolved. Madison and Tyler had no idea this provision existed. My second call was to my bank in Minneapolis. This is Sarah Walsh. I need to activate a fraud alert on all my accounts immediately. Of course, Mrs. Walsh. What type of fraudulent activity are you concerned about? The type where my own family tries to steal my inheritance after leaving me for dead. The bank representative, bless her heart, didn't even pause. I'll flag everything immediately. Should we expect attempted access soon? Oh yes, probably within the next few days. My third call was the most satisfying. I dialed Madison's number and she answered on the first ring. Hello? Her voice was tense, worried. Hello? Sweetheart. The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. Mom? She finally whispered. But how? Where are you? I'm in Cairo, Madison. Alive, in case you were wondering. Though I suppose that's not what you were hoping to hear. Mom, I don't understand. We've been looking everywhere for you. You disappeared from the hotel and— Cut the act, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. I know exactly what you and Tyler did. The question is, what happens next? Another long silence. Then, where have you been? Where you left me. In the desert. The difference is, I survived. I could hear Tyler in the background, asking frantic questions. Madison's voice was shaking when she spoke again. Mom, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine, thinking you had any love or loyalty left for your family. But that's about to be corrected. What do you mean? I mean you and Tyler just made the biggest mistake of your lives. You thought you were killing a helpless old woman. Instead, you've awakened someone who has nothing left to lose and unlimited resources for revenge. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Madison's panicked breathing. Enjoy Cairo, sweetheart, I continued, but don't get too comfortable. You're about to learn that stealing from your family is much harder than you thought, especially when that family member is still alive to stop you. I hung up before she could respond. Dr. Meyer had been right about one thing. What Madison and Tyler had done was attempted murder, but legal prosecution would be quick and clean, over in a matter of months. What I had in mind was going to last much, much longer. Over the next 2 days, while I recovered in a luxury hotel in Cairo, paid for with a credit card that Madison and Tyler definitely couldn't access, I put the rest of my plan into motion. First, I hired a private investigator in Minneapolis to dig into Tyler's background. What I learned was fascinating. Tyler Morrison wasn't just a gold digger. He was a professional con artist with a history of targeting wealthy older women. My 22-year-old daughter wasn't his first victim, just his most recent. Second, I discovered that Tyler was in debt to some very unpleasant people in Las Vegas to the tune of $1.2 million. His plan to steal my inheritance wasn't just about greed, it was about survival. Third, and most importantly, I learned something about myself that I never knew. After 67 years of being the dutiful wife, the accommodating mother, the person who always put others first, I discovered I had a real talent for strategic thinking. Robert used to say that the best revenge is a life well lived, but sometimes the best revenge is watching your enemies destroy themselves while you pull the strings. From my hotel room overlooking the Nile, I started making calls. By the time Madison and Tyler figured out what was happening, it would be too late. The game was just beginning, and for the first time in months, I was actually enjoying myself. Madison and Tyler didn't know I was watching from across the street when they stumbled out of the Egyptian police station at 2 a.m. looking haggard and desperate. They'd been detained for 6 hours, answering questions about my disappearance that had suddenly become much more complicated now that I'd reappeared very much alive. I'd spent the day working with the authorities, but not in the way Dr. Meyer and the consulate official expected. Instead of pressing charges immediately, I told them a carefully edited version of events that painted Madison and Tyler as confused and panicked, not malicious. I think there was a miscommunication, I'd explained to the detective. They thought I was back at the hotel when they left. When they couldn't find me, they naturally assumed the worst. The detective looked skeptical. Mrs. Walsh, leaving someone in the desert without transportation or supplies is a terrible mistake, I agreed. But I'm not sure it was intentional. My daughter isn't a killer, officer. She's just young and easily influenced. What I didn't tell the detective was that I'd already gathered enough evidence to destroy them both through legal channels. But legal channels would be quick and impersonal. What I wanted was to watch them unravel slowly, completely, and publicly. After they left the police station, I followed them back to their hotel. The look on Tyler's face as they walked through the lobby was pure panic. Whatever plan he'd had was falling apart, and he was starting to realize that abandoning me might have been the worst decision of his life. I gave them an hour to settle in, then knocked on their door. Tyler answered, and the color drained from his face when he saw me. "Sarah, Hello, Tyler. May I come in? We need to talk." Madison appeared behind him, her eyes red from crying. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. "Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over us. Tyler said you'd be fine, that someone would find you quickly, and You just decided to trust your husband over your mother," I said, settling into the room's only chair. "How did that work out for you?" Tyler was pacing like a caged animal. "Look, Sarah, I know how this looks, but—" "Sit down, Tyler." Something in my voice made him obey immediately. "I've had several interesting conversations over the past few days," I continued, "with my lawyer, my bank, some private investigators, and even some people in Las Vegas who've been looking for you." Tyler went very still. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about the gambling debts? About the other women you've scammed? About the fact that you're facing serious criminal charges in Nevada that you've been avoiding for the past year?" Madison stared at her husband. "What gambling debts? What other women?" "Oh, he didn't tell you?" I asked with mock surprise. "Tyler owes $1.2 million to some very unpleasant people who don't accept payment plans. He needed my inheritance not just for greed, but because his kneecaps depend on it." The look of betrayal on Madison's face was almost worth the 2 days in the desert. Almost. "That's not— Tyler, tell her that's not true." Tyler couldn't meet her eyes. "And the other women," I continued, enjoying myself now. "Let's see. There was Mrs. Henderson in Phoenix, $400,000, Mrs. Chen in San Diego, $200,000, and my personal favorite, Mrs. Blackwood in Seattle, who Tyler married and divorced in the same year, walking away with half her assets." Madison sank onto the bed, staring at Tyler like she'd never seen him before. "You've been married before?" "Technically, he's still married to Mrs. Blackwood," I said, "which means his marriage to you isn't legal. But don't worry, sweetheart, because that's the least of your problems." Tyler finally found his voice. "What do you want?" "Sarah? What do I want?" I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "I want to watch you both face the consequences of your actions. I want Madison to understand what happens when you try to murder your own mother for money. And I want you, Tyler, to experience what it feels like when someone more powerful than you decides to destroy your life." "We didn't try to murder you," Madison protested weakly. "You left me in the desert with minimal water, no transportation, and no way to call for help. What exactly did you think would happen?" The silence stretched between us. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, standing up. "Tomorrow morning you're both going to the American Embassy where you're going to confess exactly what you did. Madison, you're going to call every single person you've told lies to about my disappearance, and you're going to correct the record." "And if we don't?" Tyler asked. I smiled at him, and I could see him flinch at whatever he saw in my expression. "If you don't, those men from Las Vegas are going to get a very interesting phone call about where you've been hiding. My bank is going to press charges for attempted fraud. The Egyptian authorities are going to learn that you're a fugitive from American justice, and the private investigator I hired is going to release a very detailed report about your criminal history to every major newspaper in Minneapolis." Tyler was sweating now. "You can't do that. Watch me." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo I'd taken that morning. It was the message I'd written on the wall of the abandoned Bedouin village, clear evidence of what they'd done. "This little note is now in the hands of the Egyptian police, the American consulate, and my attorney. It's what's called evidence of premeditated murder. I also left GPS coordinates so the authorities can verify exactly where you abandoned me." Madison was crying again. "Mom, please. I know we made a terrible mistake, but—" "This wasn't a mistake, Madison. This was attempted murder motivated by greed. And the only reason you're sorry is because you got caught." I walked to the door, then turned back. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide what kind of consequences you want to face. The easy ones or the hard ones, but either way, you're going to face them." As I left their hotel room, I could hear Madison screaming at Tyler. demanding to know what else he'd lied about. The sound was music to my ears. The next morning, I treated myself to breakfast on the hotel terrace overlooking the Nile. The sun was shining, the coffee was excellent, and somewhere across the city, two people who'd tried to kill me were discovering exactly how much power a determined woman with unlimited resources could wield. Madison had called me 3 times already. I wasn't answering. Tyler had called once. I'd answered that one just to hang up on him. By noon, they'd be at the embassy, confessing everything. By evening, they'd be on a plane back to Minneapolis, where a very different kind of justice would be waiting. But the best part? They still had no idea what I had planned for them when we got home. The beautiful thing about having real money, the kind of generational wealth that Tyler and Madison had tried to steal, is that you can afford to be patient. You can hire the best people, wait for the perfect moment, and strike with precision that leaves your enemies completely destroyed. 3 weeks after returning from Egypt, I was sitting in the office of Harrison & Associates, Minneapolis's most prestigious private investigation firm. The manila folder in front of me contained enough information to end Tyler's life as he knew it, and seriously damage Madison's as well. "Mrs. Walsh," Harrison said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I have to admit, this is the most comprehensive revenge operation I've ever been hired to execute." "I prefer to think of it as justice," I replied, sipping my coffee. "What's our timeline?" Harrison opened his laptop. "Tyler's creditors in Las Vegas received an anonymous tip about his location yesterday. They'll be in Minneapolis by Friday. His illegal marriage status has been reported to the appropriate authorities. Bigamy charges will be filed Monday morning. And his probation officer in Nevada, who apparently had no idea where he'd been for the past year, is very interested in having a conversation with him. And Madison? The IRS received some very interesting information about unreported income and tax evasion. Apparently Tyler's been using her social security number for some creative financial arrangements. She's looking at serious federal charges." I nodded, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't expected. 3 weeks ago, I would have felt guilty about destroying my own daughter's life. Now, after surviving in the desert and discovering exactly what my 22-year-old daughter was capable of, I felt nothing but cold determination. "There's more," Harrison continued. "We traced Tyler's pattern back 7 years. 12 different women, combined losses of over $3.8 million. The FBI is very interested in what we've uncovered. When will they arrest him? Soon. But here's where it gets interesting. Tyler doesn't know about any of this yet. According to our surveillance, he and Madison are still trying to figure out how to access your accounts legally." That made me laugh. "They're still trying to steal from me? Apparently your son-in-law isn't very good at learning from his mistakes." What Tyler and Madison didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of them since the moment I walked out of that desert. While they'd been panicking and making desperate phone calls, I'd been systematically dismantling their lives with the precision of a master chess player. The first move had been financial. Within hours of my return to Minneapolis, every account Robert had set up was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Tyler's attempts to access anything had been monitored and recorded, providing perfect evidence of his criminal intent. The second move had been legal. My attorney James Morrison had filed papers that not only protected my assets, but also initiated civil suits against both Tyler and Madison for attempted murder, fraud, and elder abuse. The criminal charges would come later, after we'd gathered enough evidence to ensure convictions. The third move had been personal. I'd hired a public relations firm to prepare a very carefully crafted media campaign. In 1 week, Tyler Morrison's face would be on every local news channel and in every major newspaper, identified as a serial con artist who specialized in targeting elderly women. "Mrs. Walsh," Harrison said, pulling me back to the present, "there's something else you should know. We've been monitoring their communications, and Tyler is planning to leave the country." "When?" "Tonight. He's booked a flight to Brazil under a fake identity." I stood up, suddenly energized. "Can we stop him? We can do better than that. We can let him get all the way to the airport, then have him arrested for probation violation, fraud, and fleeing to avoid prosecution. Maximum humiliation, maximum media coverage." Perfect. That evening I drove to Madison's apartment, the apartment I'd helped her pay for, I might add, and knocked on the door. She answered, looking haggard and desperate. "Mom, thank God. Tyler's gone crazy. He's talking about leaving the country, and I don't understand what's happening. He says people are after him, and where is he, Madison? He's at the airport. Mom, I'm scared. I think Tyler might have done things I didn't know about. Bad things. I looked at my daughter, this young woman who'd stood by while her husband tried to murder me, and felt a strange mix of pity and disgust. Tyler's a criminal, Madison. He's been scamming elderly women for years, and you helped him try to kill me for my inheritance. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Her face crumpled. I didn't know about the other women. I swear I didn't know. Tyler said you were going to waste our inheritance, that we had to act before you spent it all. Our inheritance? I stepped into her apartment without being invited. Madison, let me explain something to you. You don't have an inheritance anymore. After what you did in Egypt, you don't have a mother anymore either. What do you mean? I handed her a legal document I'd been carrying. This is a formal disinheritance notice. You'll get nothing when I die, not a penny. Madison read the document, her hands shaking. You can't do this. I'm your only child. You stopped being my child when you left me to die in the desert. My phone buzzed. A text from Harrison. Package delivered at gate 42. Customer very unhappy with service. I smiled. Tyler had just been arrested. That was notification that your husband has been taken into custody, I told Madison. He's facing charges in 3 states now, including attempted murder in Egypt. The FBI is also very interested in talking to him about his pattern of targeting elderly women. Madison sank onto her couch, the legal document falling from her hands. I don't understand. How did you do all this? Sweetheart, I survived for 40 years, married to one of the shrewdest financial minds in Minneapolis. Did you really think I was some helpless old woman you could outsmart? But the desert, you could have died. I could have. I almost did. And if I had, you and Tyler would have been millionaires. That was your plan, wasn't it? Madison was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Tyler said. He made it sound like what? Like I deserved to die for my money? She couldn't answer. I walked to her window and looked out at the Minneapolis skyline, the city where I'd built a life with Robert, where I'd raised this ungrateful daughter, where I'd thought I'd live out my remaining years in peace. You know what the irony is, Madison? If you'd just been patient, if you'd just been a loving daughter, you would have inherited everything eventually. Robert's estate planning was designed to take care of you for the rest of your life. It's not too late, Madison said desperately. I can make this right. I can testify against Tyler. It's much too late for that. I turned back to face her, and she flinched at whatever she saw in my expression. Tyler's arrest is just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, you're both going to face criminal charges, civil lawsuits, federal investigations, and public humiliation that will follow you for the rest of your lives. Mom, please, I'm not your mother anymore. I'm the woman whose murder you planned and whose money you tried to steal. And I'm the woman who's going to make sure you both pay for what you did. I left Madison sobbing in her apartment and drove home to the house I'd shared with Robert for so many years. For the first time since his death, I felt truly at peace. Tyler was in jail. Madison would join him soon. Justice wasn't just coming, it was here. But the best part was still to come. 6 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom watching Tyler Morrison accept a plea deal for 8 years in federal prison for elder fraud, attempted murder, and running a multi-state con operation. Madison sat in the defendant's chair next to him, tearfully accepting her own 3-year sentence for conspiracy and attempted murder. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Tyler, once so charming and confident, looked broken and defeated. Madison had aged years in 6 months, her youthful face hollow with the weight of what she'd done. When the judge asked if they had anything to say before accepting their plea deals, Tyler stood up. Your Honor, I want to apologize to Mrs. Walsh and to all the women I've hurt over the years. I know there's nothing I can say to make up for what I did, but I want her to know that I'm sorry. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Walsh, would you like to make a statement? I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. For a moment, I looked at Madison and Tyler, these 2 people who'd tried to murder me for money and ended up destroying their own lives instead. Your Honor, 6 months ago, these 2 people left me to die in the desert because they wanted my husband's money. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old widow who would be easy to eliminate. I paused, letting that sink in. They were wrong on every count. I wasn't helpless, I wasn't easy to eliminate, and most importantly, the money they were so desperate to steal was never going to be theirs in the first place. I pulled out a document and handed it to the court clerk. This is my husband's original will, written 5 years ago. In it, he specifically disinherits Madison if she ever attempts to harm me or steal from our estate. Robert was a brilliant man who understood exactly what kind of person our daughter might become. Madison's face went white. That's impossible. I never saw any. Because we never told you about it, I said calmly. Robert hoped he'd never have to use that provision. But apparently, he understood human nature better than I did. The judge reviewed the document. Mrs. Walsh, this appears to be a valid legal provision. It is, which means that even if their plan had succeeded, even if they'd managed to kill me, Madison would have inherited nothing. The entire estate was designed to go to charity if anything suspicious happened to me. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. So you see, Your Honor, they didn't just try to commit murder. They tried to commit a completely pointless murder. They were willing to kill me for money they were never going to get. I turned to face Madison directly. You traded your mother's life for an inheritance that never existed. You chose a criminal over your own family. And now you'll spend the next 3 years in prison thinking about that choice. Madison was sobbing, but I felt nothing. The woman who'd raised her, who'd loved her unconditionally for 22 years, was gone. She'd died in that desert along with any maternal feelings I'd had left. Tyler, meanwhile, was staring at me with something that looked like respect. You planned all of this, he said. From the moment we left you in the desert, you knew exactly what you were going to do to us. I told you that first night in Cairo that you'd awakened something dangerous, I replied. I told you that you'd made the biggest mistake of your lives. You chose not to listen. The judge brought down his gavel, and it was over. Tyler would spend the next 8 years in federal prison. Madison would spend 3 years thinking about what she'd done. And I would spend the rest of my life living exactly as I pleased, accountable to no one and threatened by no one. As they led Tyler and Madison away in handcuffs, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Harrison, my private investigator, was standing behind me with a satisfied smile. How does it feel, Mrs. Walsh? Exactly like I thought it would, I replied. Like justice. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at the best restaurant in Minneapolis. I ordered champagne and the most expensive item on the menu, and I sat by the window watching the city lights twinkle below. Tomorrow, I would start the next chapter of my life. I was thinking about travel, maybe a proper trip to Egypt, one where nobody tried to murder me. Maybe a Mediterranean cruise. Maybe I'd buy a house in Italy or France, somewhere warm where I could spend my golden years in peace. The money that Tyler and Madison had killed for was still mine, all $330 million of it. But more importantly, I'd learned something valuable about myself in that desert. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, smarter than anyone had given me credit for, and absolutely ruthless when someone threatened what was mine. Robert would have been proud. As I raised my glass in a silent toast to my late husband, I thought about the message I'd written on that wall in the abandoned Bedouin village. If you find this and I don't survive, they murdered me for my inheritance. But I had survived. And I'd done more than just survive. I'd triumphed completely. The desert had tried to kill me, my own family had betrayed me, and I'd emerged stronger than ever. At 67 years old, I'd learned that it's never too late to discover what you're really capable of. And what I was capable of, apparently, was magnificent revenge. Now, I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites. And they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.